There are many words commonly used today to describe political attitudes. We are told there are conservatives, liberals, libertarians, progressives, right-wingers, left-wingers, socialists, fascists, communists and Nazis. In addition, you have political party labels. You might feel that you belong to the Republican Party or the Democrat Party. Likewise, in other nations you have a Labour Party and a Conservative Party, and yet not one person in 1,000 can clearly define the ideology that any of these words represent. They are used primarily as labels to impart an aura of either goodness or badness, depending on who uses the words and what emotions they trigger in their minds. Most political debates sound like they originate at the Tower of Babel. Everyone is speaking a different language. The words may sound familiar, but speakers and listeners each have their own private definitions. If we are to make sense of the political agendas that dominate our planet today, we must not allow our thinking to be contaminated by the emotional load of the old vocabulary, because once definitions are commonly understood, most of the disagreements come to an end. To the amazement of those who thought they were bitter ideological opponents, they often find they are actually in basic agreement. It may surprise you to learn that most of the great political debates of our time can be divided into just two viewpoints. All of the rest is fluff. Typically they focus on whether or not a particular action should be taken, but the real conflict is not about the merits of the action, it is about the principles, the ethical code that justifies or forbids that action. It is a contest between the ethics of collectivism on the one hand and individualism on the other. Those are words that have meaning, and they describe a philosophical chasm that divides the entire Western world. The one thing that is common to both collectivists and individualists is that the vast majority of them are well-intentioned. They want the best life possible for their families, for their countrymen, and for mankind. They want prosperity and justice for their fellow man. Where they disagree is how to bring those things about. This series will explore the research done over 45 years by Mr. G. Edward Griffin about the 5 major concepts of social and political relationships, and within each of them, the opposite viewpoints of collectivism and individualism. The first of these concerns the origin and nature of human rights. Part 1 of this series will show where rights are derived from. Does an individual have rights simply because a law guarantees them? It is important to determine where rights originate from, both for governments and individuals, because the universal rule is, a right source determines their nature. Where does the justification for protecting those rights come from, and where does an individual or government claim their authority from when they exert force over others in protecting those rights? Part 2 will examine the concept of group supremacy. We will look at the difference between a republic and a democracy and study what it means to be a group. Does a group have groups' rights? Are those rights greater than the individual's rights? And where is this greater good mentality that dictates collectivist policy likely to lead us? In Part 3 we look to the divide between collectivism and individualism regarding coercion versus freedom, primarily a question of charity. The issue of charity is a two-part question. First, what is to be achieved, and then how to achieve it. As mentioned earlier, both sides generally agree on the first part of the question, that charity is good and that we should help less fortunate individuals. However, they disagree on how they should be helped. Collectivists favour a Robin Hood syndrome, using government and taxes to redistribute wealth, and paint individualists as selfish for objecting to this. Individualists, on the other hand, advocate voluntary actions and feel that such use of force undermines the truth of the term charity. In Part 4 we examine equality and inequality under law. Collectivists believe themselves to be social engineers and use government to enforce racial or gender quotas in order to bring about a more equal society. Individualists disagree and state that while we are all unequal, we all deserve the same equality under the law, and to favour one class or race above another is unequal and it further divides society. The final part of this series explores the proper role of government, the difference between an individualist and a collectivist state, and where each government will take its society. By the end of this series, you will be aware of how each new collectivist law, further regulating society, undermines individual freedom and liberty and begins the inevitable slope towards totalitarianism.